She was given to him as property. What no one expected. He'd give everything to set her free. The sun had scorched the desert sky into a molten sheet of fire by midday. The base shimmered like a mirage. Steel and sand fused into a skeleton of power and paranoia. This was Outpost Juno, buried in the heart of what used to be Arizona. Now just another forgotten patch of Earth's post-war crust. Above it flew the new flag of the United Colonial Defense, half Terra, half machine. Inside the perimeter, soldiers in gray exosuits moved like shadows, disciplined and deadly. Among them, Corporal Ethan Drake, 29, battle-tested, morally frayed. He didn't talk much. Didn't need to. His record spoke louder than words. 57 confirmed kills, 2 years in orbital combat, and 0 insubordinations. A perfect soldier. He hated being called that. Today was different. The war had ended, at least on paper. One of the peace terms included distribution of biological assets, a cold phrase masking something worse. Alien prisoners turned into property. Not slaves, officially. Just assigned companions for high-ranking soldiers. Everyone at Juno called them trophies. At 1,300 hours, Ethan got the call. Corporal Drake, report to Transfer Base 6. No explanation. Just the order. He walked in, expecting supplies. What he found instead froze him. Behind a glass partition stood a woman unlike any he'd seen. She was tall, almost his height, with skin the color of electric sky. Her long blonde hair hung past her shoulders like molten light, slightly matted, but still radiant against the dirt on her skin. She wore a thin uniform of gray mesh, standard issue for alien detainees. Her wrists were bound loosely with magnetic cuffs, more symbolic than secure. She didn't look broken. She looked awake. Eyes the color of amethyst burning beneath heavy lashes, scanning him with cautious intensity. "This is yours," said Lieutenant Carr, who stood beside the transfer panel, chewing a synth leaf stick. Model's called Allery Type 3, but she goes by Sura. Official war asset. High genetic value. Congratulations. Ethan didn't move. Is this a joke? Carr raised an eyebrow. She's been cleared. Non-hostile. Behaviorally compliant. Bonding protocols already initiated. All you gotta do is sign. She's not a weapon. No, she's a reward. For saving Fort Carver from total annihilation last quarter. Carr leaned closer. Look man, I know it's weird, but she's yours now. Treat her right. Or don't. I don't give a damn. Just don't send her back. Command wants the optics. Ethan stared at the tablet with the transfer form. His name was already filled in. He didn't sign it. Not yet. Carr didn't wait. He pressed the panel, and the glass door hissed open. Sura stepped out slowly. Ethan could feel every pair of eyes on him. He could feel the heat crawling up his spine. This wasn't just a gift. It was a test. Maybe even a trap. Sura stopped in front of him. For a moment, the whole world went still. And then she bowed. Not a deep, submissive bow. Just a slight tilt of the head. A gesture that was more curious than obedient. Like she was watching him just as much as he was watching her. He looked in her eyes. They were not afraid. That unnerved him more than anything. "Do you understand English?" he asked. She nodded. "Do you want to be here?" Silence. Then, in a soft, precise voice, she said, "Want is not part of the arrangement." Her accent was slight, almost melodic. Like water over glass. Ethan turned back to Carr. "I'm not signing this. I didn't ask for a pet." Carr rolled his eyes. "You don't have to sign it. Just take her. You'll get used to it. Everyone does." But Ethan didn't get used to things. He studied Sura, and something in him twisted. Not pity, but recognition. She wasn't docile. She was waiting. He took a breath. "Follow me," he said, and walked out without another word. She followed. The base corridors were narrow and sterile. They passed soldiers who gave Ethan sideways glances, some smirking, others nodding with silent approval. Like he'd just been given a prize car. A new toy. Ethan's room was small, bed, table, weapons locker. No personal touches. No photographs. Just him, his gear, and now her. He opened the door and motioned for her to enter. She did, glancing once over her shoulder before stepping inside. There was no second bed. He saw her hesitate, but she didn't speak. He grabbed a folded blanket and laid it on the floor. "Here. It's clean." Sura knelt beside it and sat with her legs crossed. She didn't complain. She didn't thank him. She just looked at the corner of the room, expression unreadable. He sat on his own bed, arms crossed, watching her like a bomb he couldn't defuse. Finally, she spoke again. "You do not like me." He answered without thinking. "I don't like what this is." She nodded, slow. "I do not either." A silence stretched between them, heavy and strange. It wasn't hostile, just real and rare. Ethan looked out the small window. The desert stretched endlessly, silent and vast. This place had buried many men, in body, in mind. Maybe she was a prisoner. Maybe he was too. 2 days passed. Sura barely spoke unless spoken to. She ate in silence, moved in silence, and slept folded beneath the blanket with her back to the door, as if even in captivity, she preferred to face the unknown. Ethan observed her, quietly, reluctantly, but he couldn't stop. There was something in the way she carried herself, not fear, but control, as if she was holding herself together piece by piece, refusing to let this place unravel her. The others noticed her too. Word spread fast in Outpost Juno. Alien asset, blue skin, blonde hair, assigned to Drake. On the third morning, Sergeant Knox came to his table during chow. "You're taking care of your prize, I hope," he said, mouth full of synthetic eggs. Ethan didn't answer. Knox grinned. "You don't have to play the cold act. We all saw her. Hell, if she were mine, I wouldn't be here eating this crap. I'd be back in my bunk getting acquainted." Ethan put down his fork. "She's not a toy." Knox leaned closer. "Then what is she, Drake? A war buddy? A date?" He stood, without a word, without drama, and walked out. Behind him, Knox muttered, "Bet she's already scrambled your brain." That night, back in the room, Sura sat by the small ventilation grate, staring out the window. The desert wind howled like ghosts clawing through the dunes. Ethan broke the silence. "Why you stare out there every night?" She replied without turning. "Because the outside is always changing, even when no one notices." He sat down across from her. "Where are you from?" Her eyes flicked to his. "Our people do not call places by territory. We name by memory." He tilted his head. "So, your home is a feeling? A moment? A connection? A pain?" He was quiet. "Then what was yours?" Sura's voice lowered. "My sister's breath when we ran through the ice fields. The heat of blood in my hands when she fell. And the silence when I could not carry her anymore." Ethan's throat tightened, and he didn't know why. No military file had prepared him for this. No mission had told him how to respond when the enemy sounded human. The next morning, Ethan found a message on his locker. "You're not one of us anymore." He didn't react. Not outwardly, but he knew things had shifted. Later, during shooting drills, his rifle jammed. When he inspected it, he found a thin filament of wire twisted into the mechanism. Sabotage. Subtle, but intentional. Someone was watching, waiting, pushing. That night, Sura noticed his scraped knuckles. "You fought." "No," he said. "Not yet. Your people distrust their own." He didn't respond. She looked at his bruised hand. "It is strange. You defend me without knowing who I am. I don't need to know who you were. I see who you are now." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened, just slightly. Then she said something he didn't expect. "In my world, bond is not assigned. It is chosen, and it is not broken, even after death." Ethan looked at her, really looked. "You think what we have is a bond?" "No," she said, "but you might." The turning point came on the 5th day. A low alarm echoed through the base. Level 2 breach. All personnel were summoned. Ethan grabbed his rifle and turned to Sura. "Stay here. Don't move." But she stood. "I can help. You're not cleared. I'm faster than any human in this base. And I can hear frequencies your alarms don't detect." He hesitated. Seconds ticked. Then he nodded. "Stay behind me." They moved as one, weaving through the narrow corridors, rifles ready. The breach turned out to be internal. Not an attack, but a riot. 2 alien detainees from another sector had broken containment. The guards were panicking, and someone had sounded the general alarm to cover their mistake. In the chaos, Sura whispered, "They're not trying to escape. They're trying to find someone." Ethan listened. He followed her instinct. They cut through an auxiliary wing and found the detainees, 2 Allery males, injured, cornered. One of them was bleeding heavily from a plasma burn. A young soldier, barely 20, was raising his gun to finish them. "Stand down," Ethan barked. "Sir." I said stand down. Sura knelt beside the wounded alien, hands glowing faintly as she pressed her fingers to his chest. Not magic, not tech, just something her people could do, stabilizing internal pressure with microvibrations. The younger soldier stared. What the hell is she doing? Saving him. The detainee looked at Sura, eyes wide. Recognition. Valamek. She shook her head. No, not anymore. The wounded one passed out. Ethan turned to the soldier. You fire that weapon again without cause. I'll have your badge and your clearance. Understood. The boy nodded stiffly and retreated. When backup arrived, the detainees were unconscious, but alive. Ethan filed a report, left out the part where Sura had healed one of them. That night, as they sat in their room, neither spoke for a long time. Then Ethan broke the silence. What did he call you? Back there. Sura hesitated. Then, it means speaker. A role. A burden. One who carries the voice of the fallen. You were someone important. I was someone trusted. Once. Ethan nodded slowly. You still are. 3 days after the breach incident, Ethan was summoned to command. He walked into the briefing chamber where 3 officers sat behind a curved, white, alloy table. The air was cold, recycled, too still. The walls glowed faintly with blue backlight, like the base itself was watching. Major Halvorsen, tall and severe, cut straight to it. Explain why you failed to report alien interference during the breach. Ethan didn't flinch. She helped prevent further casualties. No protocols were violated. Halvorsen raised a brow. So, your asset left containment during a crisis, engaged with enemy combatants, and healed one of them, and that's your defense. She acted under my order, Ethan said, and she saved a life. You're not her superior, Corporal. You're her handler. The word made his stomach turn. Halvorsen leaned forward. Command authorized the Allery integration for morale and compliance. Not for collaboration. Not for partnerships. Ethan's jaw clenched. With respect, sir, you assigned her to me. You didn't tell me to treat her like livestock. The room went silent. Then Halvorsen said flatly, You're dismissed. He turned without another word. But he knew the message. They were watching. And next time, it wouldn't be a conversation. Back in his room, Sura sat with her legs folded, fingers weaving a long, thin cord from strips of synthetic cloth she'd collected, silent, rhythmic work. When he walked in, she looked up immediately. They questioned you. Yes. Her hands didn't stop moving. They fear what they don't control. So do we, he replied. She tilted her head. But you don't try to control me. He sat beside her, watching her braid the threads. I don't know what this is between us, he said, but I know they'll do anything to break it. She looked at him, expression unreadable. And what would you do? She asked quietly. He didn't answer, because the thought that had begun to bloom in the back of his mind, the impossible one, was now growing roots. That night, someone slid a data chip under Ethan's door. No signature. No note. He locked it into his console. The screen lit up with security footage from inside his room. Every interaction with Sura. Every word, every glance. Some with audio, some without. The timestamps were dated back from day one. They'd been recording him since the beginning. He turned to Sura. She hadn't moved. You knew, he said. She nodded. I heard the pulses behind the wall. The cameras. I felt them. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I had, you would have looked at me differently. Ethan exhaled, sat heavily on the edge of the bed. They're going to use this against us. She stared at the footage for a moment, then said softly, They already are. The next morning, Ethan found his access to half the base restricted. His rifle was replaced with a stun-only model. His training assignments were downgraded. It was quiet. No direct charges. Just erosion. The message was clear. Back off, or disappear. That evening, Sura asked the question neither of them wanted to say out loud. Will they separate us? They can. Will you let them? He looked her in the eyes. No. And that's when she told him. There's a place. Far from here. Beneath the old solar farms. My people used to hide there before the peace treaty. If we made it that far, I could send a signal. A signal to who? To those who are still alive. Still free. He shook his head. You want to run? No, she said. I want to survive. With you. The silence that followed hit heavier than any explosion. He stood, paced the small room, running his hands over his shaved scalp. Leaving the base is desertion. Treason. I was given to you as property. Your entire system is treason. He stopped, looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a man with one impossible choice. They began planning in silence. Ethan knew the patrol schedules. He memorized them better than his own heartbeat. There was a 3-minute gap between drone sweeps on the west perimeter. The desert beyond was a death trap. Heat, exposure, no cover for miles. But if they moved fast enough, he had friends he could no longer trust. He had a future that would vanish the second he stepped outside the gate. But when he looked at Sura, who stared at the stars like they were family, he knew what mattered. On the fourth night, they prepared. No gear, just food, a water cartridge, a med pack, and one stolen flare grenade tucked beneath his uniform. Before they moved, she said, "Once we cross, there's no return." "I'm not going back," he said, and neither of them looked back. They slipped through the gate. The desert hit them like fire, dry, bitter wind ripping at their skin, sand cutting like glass. The stars were vivid, wild, uncaring. Ethan led the way. Sura stayed close, her footsteps ghost silent. But just when they reached the far edge of the dune field, a low whirring sound broke the air. Drones. The patrol had changed. Too soon. They dropped, flattening themselves in the sand. A cold blue light swept across the ground a few feet away. Then another. Then the third. They'd been spotted. Ethan stood, pulled the flare from his belt, and looked at her. "Run east. Find the solar ruins. I'll draw them off. You'll die." "No," he said. "I'll just give you enough time to live." But Sura grabbed his arm. Firm, strong, unflinching. "Then we do it together." They ran. Not away from the drones, but toward the nearest ridge of jagged rocks, shadows and cover. Alarms blared behind them. Lights swept across the desert. But Ethan didn't stop. Sura matched him, stride for stride. When the first stun blast lit the ground behind them, he threw the flare grenade high into the air. A red fireball exploded into the sky, blinding the drones just long enough for them to disappear behind the stone wall of an ancient turbine farm. They fell to the ground, panting, hearts beating out of sync. He looked at her, dust coating her hair, blood on her lip, eyes wild with something he couldn't name. And she whispered, "Now we're free, or we're dead." The turbines loomed like skeletons in the night. Once they had churned sunlight into power for entire cities. Now they stood broken, rusted, barely holding their shape against the desert winds. Sura and Ethan moved silently through their shadows, ducking low, listening to every vibration in the ground. They'd outrun the drones, for now. But the real threat wasn't made of circuits. It was the humans who would follow. Ethan checked the scanner on his wrist. No signals yet, but he knew that wouldn't last. His implant would be flagged as soon as his absence hit command logs. They'd triangulate him within the hour. "We don't have much time," he said, breath ragged. Sura knelt by a collapsed solar dish, brushing away the sand, searching. "This place, it's older than I remembered. You said you could signal someone." She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers found a ridge of metal buried in the dirt, a panel. With a twist and a hum, she opened a hatch, revealing an ancient, organic-looking interface unlike any human tech. Blue veins pulsed along its surface. "I can send a burst," she said, "but only once. They'll hear it, and so will your people." Ethan crouched beside her. "And if no one comes, then we disappear." He nodded. No hesitation. No regret. "Do it." Sura placed both palms on the interface. Her skin glowed faintly against the control mesh. A soft hum filled the air, rising in pitch until it vibrated the air like a scream held back by silence. Then a pulse. Not light, not sound. Something deeper, something ancient. It passed through them like a shiver in their bones. Then stillness. "It's done," she whispered. They waited. Minutes passed. The stars blinked above them, cold and indifferent. And just as Ethan opened his mouth to speak, a sound like thunder cracked across the desert. But it wasn't the sky. It was engines. 3 black dropships burst over the ridge, silent and fast, headlights cutting through the dark. Not drones. Not search teams. Extraction units. "They're too fast," Ethan muttered. "They were already on us." Sura stood. "No, these aren't your people." He turned to her. "What?" A deep hum resonated from the ground as the first dropship descended. No visible doors, no insignias. The ship melted open at the bottom, revealing a humanoid figure with silver armor and no face. Just a smooth, reflective mask. Sura stepped forward, breath-catching. I know that pattern. It's Varn class. They're guardians. Ethan stood beside her. Yours. She nodded slowly. They were protectors before the fall. The figure stepped down. A voice echoed, not from a mouth, but through the air itself. Volomek. Sura bowed her head. I do not carry that name. The figure didn't move. You called. We answered. Ethan stepped forward. She's not going back in chains. The guardian turned its mask to him. She never should have been. Sura glanced between them, confused. Why are you here? The voice replied. The rebellion lives. And we need you. Ethan felt a shift immediately. This wasn't just rescue. This was recruitment. That's when the sky lit up red. A missile struck the ridge behind them. Sand exploded upward. Debris rained down. Alarm screamed in Ethan's earpiece. UCDF artillery, he growled. They locked onto my implant. They're zeroing in. Another explosion. The second guardian was hit mid-step, vaporized in a flash of blue flame. Ethan grabbed Sura's arm. We have to go now. But the remaining guardian grabbed his shoulder, cold and firm. You carry a tag. They'll track you to the core. I know. Ethan snapped. What do you want me to do? Dig out with my knife. The guardian extended a metallic hand. I can sever it. Ethan paused. Looked to Sura. She nodded. Let them. He clenched his jaw and held out his arm. The guardian's fingers morphed into a precision blade. In one sharp movement, it cut through the skin and pulled a small, glowing chip from the tissue. Pain seared through his nerves, but he didn't flinch. The guardian crushed the implant underfoot. It sizzled, spark died. Then the voice said, Now run. They ran with the guardians, weaving between turbine ruins as artillery fire rained down. The second dropship was already downed. The third was lifting off, but its ramp stayed open. Sura turned mid-run. One of the guardians had fallen, back shredded by shrapnel. Without hesitation, she ran back. Sura, Ethan shouted. She knelt by the dying guardian. Its mask was cracked. Beneath it, blue skin. Her own people. A whisper came from the fallen one. You survived. And Sura whispered back. I remembered. She pressed her fingers to the guardian's forehead, glowing faintly. Then ran to Ethan. They dove into the dropship as it lifted off. Below them, the desert turned into chaos. Fire, shadows, dust, and war. Sura stood at the ramp, staring at the wreckage. He stood beside her. You knew what this would cost. She looked at him, tears lining her bright eyes. Yes, and I still chose it. If you've ever rooted for a love that wasn't supposed to happen, if you believe freedom and love are worth the risk, subscribe now. There's more coming, and their fight is just beginning. The dropship touched down deep in the canyon. Camouflaged by the shattered remains of solar fields and thick dust storms, the entrance to the underground refuge opened like a scar in the earth. Massive stone gates, operated by energy veins buried beneath the sand, parted for the first time in years. Ethan followed Sura into the dark. The air inside was cold, metallic, and pulsing with life. Not mechanical, organic, like the place itself was alive. Blue-tinted light crawled along the walls, feeding dim plant-like growths that clung to the ceilings. The Guardian escort led them through narrow tunnels carved by heat, not tools. They passed strange beings, not all Owlery. Refugees, survivors, children with glowing skin, warriors missing limbs, eyes that watched Ethan with confusion, suspicion, and awe. Sura walked ahead of him, tall and silent. They entered a central chamber, a vast hollow dome lit from within by a crystalline root system pulsing with power. At the center, a raised platform shaped like a spiral shell. There stood an old Owlery woman, draped in faded silver cloth. Her voice carried through the space before she even opened her mouth. You brought him. Sura bowed slightly. He chose us. The woman's eyes, clouded, violet, landed on Ethan. He carries war in his blood. I carry her, Ethan said simply. A pause. Then the old woman turned to Sura. Your name was erased from the archive, and now it returns attached to a human. Sura didn't answer. Not immediately. Then she said, steady and clear, I have seen what they did to us. I have lived it. And I have seen what one of them can do when he chooses differently. Do you believe he can lead? No, Sura said. But I believe he can fight beside us. And that's worth more. After the council, Ethan and Sura were led to a small sleeping chamber carved into the rock. No doors, just hanging roots that dripped faint luminescence. He sat on the edge of the bed-like structure, warm stone, smoother than it looked. His arm still ached where the implant had been torn out. He'd barely slept in days. His body was exhausted, but his mind was burning. Sura sat beside him, silent. What now? He asked. She looked at her hands. There's a base. West of here. Hidden. Human-aligned. They're using Allery tech. Stolen. Hybridizing weapons. There's no treaty anymore. No pretense. They're preparing for a second wave. How do you know? She looked at him, eyes blazing. Because I built the prototypes they're now twisting into weapons. Ethan stiffened. You worked for them. I was captured early. Forced to cooperate. I gave them tech to save lives, not destroy them. But they took it. Bent it. She stood, pacing. That base has a pulse cannon that can erase this entire sanctuary from orbit. He stood too. So we hit it first. Her eyes met his. You'd fight your own kind. He walked to her. Stopped just a breath away. They stopped being my kind the second they put chains on you. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Sura mapped the facility from memory. Ethan trained with the Guardians. Their weapons were alive, responsive, attuned to thought. At first, his hands refused to understand. But soon, the blades hummed with his heartbeat. But they were not a united force. The rebellion had no structure. Just scattered survivors, bitter memories, and fear. At a meeting of commanders, voices rose. He's human. He'll betray us. He's marked. He doesn't belong here. Ethan stood and didn't flinch. You're right. I don't. I never belonged where I came from either. He glanced at Sura. But I do know how to break a human stronghold. And if you let me, I'll burn that cannon down before they ever find this place. Silence. Then one voice. Let him try. Suras. On the 4th night, Ethan found her on the outer rim of the sanctuary, where the roots thinned and the wind echoed faintly from cracks in the stone. She stood barefoot on the rock, arms wrapped around herself, eyes closed. He approached quietly. You okay? She nodded slowly, just remembering what it felt like to have no future, and then remembering, I have one now. He stepped closer, and she whispered, I'm scared. So am I. They stood together in silence, not touching, not speaking, just existing, two beings torn from opposite sides of a war, sharing breath in a moment that felt stolen from fate. Then she looked at him and said, If we die tomorrow, I want to die not as your prisoner, not as your mission. He stepped forward. And what do you want to be? She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw, soft, electric. Your choice. He leaned into her touch and said, You already are. The desert was colder at night than Ethan ever imagined. On the ridge, just past the canyon, he and Sura lay on their stomachs, watching through scope. In the distance, the UCDF outpost flickered with artificial lights, a square of cruelty built on stolen ground. Sura whispered, The cannon is here, below the main structure. There's a cooling shaft exposed at night. That's how we get in. Ethan nodded. I'll take the northern side. Draw fire if I have to. She turned to him, sharply. No, we go in together. It's safer if we split. No, Ethan. Her voice was low, fierce. I already lost too many going in alone. He met her eyes. She wasn't pleading. She was promising. That night, under a decaying satellite dish that once served as communication relay, they made camp. Ethan worked on dismantling a remote lock override, while Sura sharpened the blade that hummed when it touched her palm. Their bodies moved in rhythm, not in unison, in harmony. When the silence settled between them again, Ethan finally asked, What were you before all this? She looked up. Before captivity. No, before the war. Sura sat back, her golden hair catching faint starlight. I was a memory keeper. I stored emotion, song, language, grief. My people, we didn't write history. We felt it, preserved it by carrying it in our skin, our voices. He blinked. You remember emotions like data? She touched her chest. They live in here, even when the body forgets. What do you remember now? Surah hesitated. Then, softly, fear, rage, loss. She reached toward him, placed her hand gently over his heart. And this strange new thing I don't have a word for. Ethan covered her hand with his. You don't need one. They moved before dawn. The infiltration was surgical. Ethan took down 2 guards silently, disabling the motion towers. Surah hacked the coolant line with precise pulses from her palm, melting the internal lock. For every inch of progress, they watched each other's backs like they had done it for years. The deeper they moved, the colder it got. They entered the cannon core through a lateral shaft, barely wide enough for a human. The chamber beyond was vast, pulsing with stolen Allery tech. Twisted cables, artificial minds whispering in digital tongue. Surah froze at the sight of it. These were made to heal, she said, voice shaking. They turned them into weapons. Ethan touched her shoulder. We turn them off. They moved to the control node, a glowing interface at the core's base. But before Surah could reach it, a voice echoed through the chamber. Don't. From the shadows stepped Sergeant Knox. He looked older, leaner, sharper, like someone who'd chosen the wrong side and doubled down. Knew you'd run here, he said to Ethan. Knew you'd crawl after her. She got in your head. Ethan raised his rifle. Step aside. Knox laughed. I was like you once. Thought they were people. Thought they could feel what we feel. But you know what I learned? They remember us like predators, not partners. Ethan didn't answer. Knox looked at Surah. She's just using you. Wait till you see what she does when you stop being useful. And that's when Surah stepped forward, calm and clear. You're wrong. Her voice carried like crystal breaking air. I felt everything. I felt the pain of chains, the silence of isolation, the fear of being given away like a weapon. She looked at Ethan, and I felt him break it all. Not with orders, with choice. Knox raised his weapon, but Ethan was faster. One shot, one clean, quiet shot. Knox fell. The silence afterward was heavier than death. Ethan lowered the rifle. Surah stared at him. You could have let him go. He wouldn't have let us go. She stepped toward him, touched the side of his face. You're not who you were. Neither are you. They disabled the cannon, set the overload. As the chamber began to collapse behind them, they ran, not away from destruction, but towards something finally worth saving. Back in the sanctuary, the news spread fast. The cannon was gone. The base was destroyed. But more than that, they had done it together. Some Allery still didn't trust Ethan. Some never would. But now they listened. Not because he was loud, but because Surah stood beside him. And when she spoke, they believed. That night, they sat side by side on the edge of the sleeping chamber. Surah whispered, You changed me. He smiled. I think you were just waiting for someone to see you. She leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time, they weren't running, hiding, or fighting. They were just breathing. Together. They came without warning. No blips on the scanner. No tremors in the earth. Just silence, followed by sudden light. Blinding, white-hot, cascading through the roots of the sanctuary like a second sun breaking through the rock. Alarms howled across the underground dome. Cracks split the walls. Guardians shouted orders. Children screamed. Debris rained down in bursts. Ethan grabbed his rifle. Surah was already up, eyes locked onto the ceiling like she could see through stone. They tunneled under the scanner field. They bypassed the gates. Ethan cursed under his breath. They've learned from us. Boom. Another blast hit, closer this time. Dust exploded from the far wall. Then, figures poured in through the breach. UCDF exo-soldiers. Heavy armor. Neural linked. Eyes glowing red behind black visors. And leading them, Lieutenant Carr. The same officer who had given Surah to Ethan like a piece of equipment. He stepped through the breach calmly, gun lowered, voice projected through internal comms. Surrender the Allery, or we purge this place, starting with the children. Ethan didn't wait. He opened fire. The Guardians followed. Blue-tinted weapons fired arcs of living energy, striking helmets and bursting circuitry. Screams echoed through the chamber. But it was chaos. The sanctuary wasn't built for war. It was shelter, memory. Now it was a battleground. Surah moved like lightning, vaulting over stone ledges, blades spinning from her palms, slicing through exosuits like paper. But there were too many, and they were targeting her. She dodged a stun blast, but a second struck her shoulder. She stumbled. Ethan shouted, cutting down 2 soldiers, running to her, through falling stone and screams. When he reached her, blood ran down her arm, purple-blue, shimmering under the emergency lights. "I'm fine," she growled, gritting her teeth. "It's not deep." He pulled her behind a column as blasts struck around them. But then Carr's voice boomed again. "You know how this ends, Drake. You can still walk out of here." "You, not her." Ethan looked at Sura, eyes locked, breaths rapid, hands bloodied. He stood, lifted his rifle over the column, and fired at Carr. Missed. The next blast came fast. The column exploded behind them. Ethan was thrown sideways. His head slammed against the stone. Darkness clawed at the edge of his vision. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard only one sound: Sura screaming. He woke to firelight. Pain bloomed in his ribs. His leg throbbed, dislocated, maybe fractured. Sura was dragging him across the floor of a smaller chamber. Behind her, the entrance collapsed in a firestorm. The enemy was closing in. "We need to seal this," she panted. He tried to rise. Failed. "I'm slowing you down." "Shut up." Her hands trembled as she reached into the emergency supply pack, pulled out a fusion charge. "You're not using that." Ethan gasped. "It'll cave in the whole wing." "I know." Her fingers hovered over the detonator. "No," Ethan said, grabbing her wrist. "If you do this, you're trapped here with me." "I know." She looked at him, eyes fierce, voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you." Boom. Another blast shook the chamber. A section of ceiling gave way. Dust filled their lungs. The only light came from the flickering veins of energy across Sura's arm. Ethan cupped her face with his bloodied hand. "If you stay, they'll kill us both." Sura leaned into his touch. "If I go, I'm already dead." Footsteps. Carr's voice again, closer now. "I warned you, Corporal." Sura stepped into the open, arms wide. "You want me? Come take me." Carr raised his gun. "You think I won't?" And that's when Ethan fired from the shadows. One shot, clean, final, hit Carr in the throat. He dropped, choking, bleeding into his armor. But it wasn't over. The remaining soldiers opened fire. Sura dove, grabbing Ethan, dragging him to the detonator. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," he said. She hit the charge. A wall of fire erupted. The ceiling came down, and everything went white. Silence. Darkness. Then sound. Faint. Dripping water. Ethan opened his eyes. He was half buried in rubble. Coughing. Breathing. Alive. Beside him, Sura groaned, barely conscious, her face streaked with blood and ash. He reached for her. She squeezed his hand. "We made it," she whispered. He laughed, hoarse, broken, overwhelmed. "Yeah, we did. But the cost was clear. The sanctuary was gone, and so were many who had lived in it. They crawled from the wreckage at sunrise, bloodied, bruised, alive, hand in hand. The desert didn't care who lived or died. The sun rose like it always did, harsh, beautiful, blinding. Wind swept across the dunes, erasing footprints, burying blood, and folding destruction into the dust. Ethan sat on a flat rock, near the remains of a collapsed turbine. His leg was bound with fabric. His ribs screamed with every breath. But the pain was good. The pain meant he was still here. Sura knelt beside a shallow grave, covering the last of the fallen with a layer of sand. Her hands were steady, but her face was blank, expressionless, like her emotions had been pulled underground with the dead. He watched her, not as a soldier, not as someone who had rescued her, but as someone she had chosen to stay with, even when she didn't have to. When she finished, she walked back in silence and sat beside him. For a long time, they didn't speak, just existed, together. Finally, Sura whispered, "They're all gone." Ethan nodded. "We're not." Another silence. She said, "I don't know what we're supposed to do now." He looked at her. Sunlight hit her face just right. Blue skin glowing soft gold, golden hair tangled, streaked with ash and memory. "You don't have to know. We'll figure it out." Sura turned to him, eyes glassy but alive. "My people are gone. Yours want us dead. We have no map." Ethan leaned back against the rock. "Then we draw our own." They build a shelter, nothing more than torn solar panels strapped between rusted beams, with sandbags to block the worst of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. At night, they sat around a small heat lamp, shared protein rations, whispered old memories. Ethan told her about the forests he once saw in the Pacific North, before the wildfires. She told him about sky beasts or people used to ride before the war took the air. They traded memories like stories, like currency. One night, Ethan asked, "Why did you fight so hard to stay with me?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Because every time I want to give up, your voice reminded me who I was, not what they made me." He looked down at his hands. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Sura reached for him, touched the scar on his arm where the implant had been. "You're someone who chose me, without command, without law, without reward. That's not a soldier. That's a man." He felt tears threaten behind his eyes, not from pain, but from truth. No one had ever called him that before. Weeks passed. They moved at night, followed old communication towers, picked up scattered messages on broken radios. Some spoke of new colonies, others of rebellion. Most were lies. But one night, they heard a voice, clear, defiant, real. "If you're out there, we're rebuilding. Come west, to Haven Sector. You're not alone." Sura looked at Ethan. He just nodded, and they began walking again. Not because they had a destination, but because they refused to disappear. Because the story wasn't ending. It was beginning again. The wind was sharp in the mountains. It cut through Ethan's jacket, stung his lungs. But he welcomed it. Cold reminded him he was alive, that he wasn't dreaming. Beside him, Sura walked in silence. Their boots crunched over frost and gravel. No drones above, no soldiers behind, just sky, cliffs, and the rising glow of a new day beyond the ridgeline. They had been walking for 2 weeks, sleeping in rock crevices, eating ration paste, avoiding comm signals. And still, they moved forward, because now, forward was the only direction that made sense. At the top of the ridge, they stopped. Below them stretched a valley, scarred but green. Solar towers in ruins, fields growing wild again. And far in the distance, the unmistakable shape of a small city surrounded by modular domes. Haven Sector. They had made it. Almost. Sura sat on a boulder, pulled her hair from her face, and closed her eyes. Ethan joined her, easing himself down with a groan. His ribs still ached. His leg would never fully recover. His aim wasn't what it used to be, but he was free. And more than that, he was his own. He turned to her. "You ever think about what would have happened if I'd signed that transfer form?" She opened her eyes, smiled faintly. "You'd still be a Juno, probably upgraded. Medals. New companion assigned." He nodded. "And you?" "I'd be dead." Silence. Then Ethan said something he hadn't said before. Something simple. Something true. "I'm glad I didn't sign it." She looked at him. Really looked. "No," she said. "You did sign something. Just not on paper." He tilted his head. She touched her chest, then his. "You signed here." They spent the night on the ridge. Built a small fire with dry moss and salvaged plastic scraps. Sura leaned against his side as they watched the stars. She whispered, "My people used to believe that those who lost everything would one day guide others to something new. Not because they were wise, but because they understood the cost." Ethan looked up. They were right. She took his hand. He didn't let go. They weren't fugitives anymore. They were witnesses. Of everything lost. Of everything broken. And of something no one could take from them. A choice. Made in fire. Held through blood. And walked, one step at a time, toward a world worth living in. Together. The gates of Haven creaked open with the sound of rusted steel and new hope. Ethan and Sura walked in together, dirty, lean, quiet, and were met by people who no longer cared about flags, only about shared survival. A human man with cybernetic arms handed them water. An Allery woman with plasma scars led them to a rest module. No one asked who they were, only if they needed to stay. They stayed. In the weeks that followed, Ethan helped rebuild the comm towers. Sura began teaching children, Allery and human, to sing the stories her people had almost lost. The kids listened wide-eyed, spellbound. Sometimes, at night, she sang for Ethan too. There wasn't a house yet, just a tent. But inside it was everything they needed. Shelter, warmth, and a silence that felt safe. One morning, Ethan woke up before the sun and found Sura sitting on the hillside, watching the new crop fields being planted below. He sat beside her and asked, "Do you regret it?" She looked at him, not with words, but with peace, then said, "I'm free. There's nothing to regret." He took her hand. She held it tight. This was the story of a human who refused to accept slavery as victory, of an alien who refused to be owned, and of a love that defied the impossible and changed everything. If this story moved you, if you've ever rooted for someone who risked it all to live something real, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel because there's so much more coming. Thanks for walking with us this far.